They stood at my door with the diaper bag already packed, smiles rehearsed, excuses ready. Just a few hours, Mom. Emergency at work. But I didn't open the screen door. I didn't reach for the baby carrier. I just stood there, my hand resting on the door frame, and said 5 words that changed everything. That will be $500. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was the sound of a pattern finally breaking, and I had waited 4 years too long to break it. My daughter-in-law, Rachel's smile froze halfway across her face, stuck in that practiced brightness that never quite reached her eyes. Behind her, my son Marcus shifted his weight, briefcase in one hand, car keys already dangling from the other. He looked at me like I'd just spoken in a language he didn't understand. The twins were strapped into their stroller, faces sticky with breakfast, sippy cups already leaking onto the fabric. Little Emma, just 3 years old, stood beside Rachel, tugging at her mother's designer handbag with small, persistent fingers. "Mom," Marcus said, and there was a warning in his voice, that tone that said, "Don't embarrass me, don't make this difficult, don't be unreasonable. We need to leave in 5 minutes. Rachel has a presentation." "Then you should have called a professional service," I replied, my voice steady, calm, remarkably even considering the years of resentment that had been building like water behind a dam. "I believe there's an agency on Maple Street. They charge $400 per day for twins, plus an additional $100 for a toddler. I'm actually giving you a discount." Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Marcus like he was supposed to fix this, to talk sense into his crazy mother, who had apparently lost her mind between last Thursday when I'd watched the children for 11 hours straight, and this Tuesday morning when I'd decided I was worth more than being taken for granted. "You're joking," Rachel said finally, her voice pitched high and tight. "You're our family. You don't charge family." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, and watched hope flicker briefly across her perfectly contoured face. "Family doesn't charge family, but family also doesn't treat family like an on-call service that never gets a thank you, never gets asked if the timing works, never gets consideration when they're recovering from illness or have their own plans or simply need rest. So which are we, Rachel? Family or a convenient?" The question hung there in the morning air, heavy and unavoidable. A car passed on the street behind them. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Emma had stopped tugging on Rachel's bag and was staring up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that used to make me fold immediately, that used to make me say yes before they'd even finished asking. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood whenever he'd been caught doing something he knew was wrong. "This is really not the time for this conversation." "Then when is?" I asked. "Because I've been trying to have this conversation for 2 years. I tried after Thanksgiving when you dropped them off for just dinner and didn't come back until the next afternoon. I tried in March when I canceled my mammogram appointment, the one I'd waited 4 months to get, because you had a work emergency. I tried last month, when Rachel called me at 6 in the morning saying you needed to leave for the airport, and could I be there in 20 minutes? And every single time, what did you say?" Marcus didn't answer. He knew exactly what he'd said. "You said, 'Thanks, Mom, you're a lifesaver.' And then you ran out the door. So yes, Marcus, this is exactly the time for this conversation. Because I'm not available anymore. Not like this. Not without boundaries. Not without respect." Rachel's hand tightened on the stroller handle. I could see the calculations running behind her eyes, the mental gymnastics she was performing to make this somehow my fault, to find the angle that would make me the villain in whatever story she'd tell her friends later. "After everything we've done for you," she began, and I actually laughed. Not a bitter laugh, just a genuine sound of disbelief. "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked. "Please, I'm genuinely curious, because I've kept a list of what I've done for you. Would you like to hear it?" I didn't wait for an answer. I pulled out my phone, the one Marcus had set up for me last year, shown me how to use the Notes app, probably never imagining I'd use it to document every single instance of being used, and I started reading. "August 15th, last year. You called at 7 p.m. saying you had food poisoning and needed me to take the twins overnight. I drove 40 minutes in a thunderstorm. You were fine the next morning, just needed a date night. August 29th. You asked if I could watch Emma for a few hours while you went to a doctor's appointment. You came back 6 hours later with shopping bags from the mall. September. Okay, we get it, Rachel interrupted, her cheeks flushing red beneath her makeup. You've been keeping score. No, I corrected her. I've been keeping records. There's a difference. Keeping score implies I was waiting to win some kind of game. I wasn't. I was trying to understand why I felt so exhausted all the time, why my own life had somehow become secondary to yours, why I couldn't seem to say no even when every part of me was screaming that I needed to. And you know what I realized when I looked at these notes? They didn't answer, but Emma had started to whimper, sensing the tension even if she couldn't understand the words. I realized that I taught you to treat me this way. Every time I said yes when I meant no, every time I rearranged my life for your convenience without you even asking if it was convenient for me, every time I pretended I didn't have my own plans or my own health concerns, or my own life because God forbid I be anything other than endlessly available, I taught you that I didn't matter, and I'm done teaching that lesson. Marcus's face had gone pale. For just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who would crawl into my lap when he was scared, who would hold my hand crossing the street, who would whisper, "I love you, Mama," before bed every single night. But that boy had grown into a man who could stand on my doorstep and treat me like hired help without even realizing he was doing it. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice still calm, still measured, because I'd practiced this speech in my head 100 times, and I wasn't going to lose control now. If you want me to watch the children, you're going to call me at least 48 hours in advance. You're going to ask, not tell. You're going to respect my answer, whether it's yes or no. And if it's an actual emergency, medical emergency, not we want to go to dinner emergency, then we'll figure it out. But casual babysitting, last-minute requests, multi-day drop-offs, those require payment, professional rates. This is insane, Rachel said, but her voice had lost its edge. She sounded tired now, almost defeated. You're really going to charge us? I'm really going to value my time, I replied. And if you valued it too, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Emma started crying in earnest now, and I felt that familiar pull, that maternal instinct that had been ruling my life for 4 years. But I didn't move. I didn't unlock the screen door. I didn't reach for her even though every part of me wanted to scoop her up and make everything okay the way I always had. Marcus looked at his watch, then at Rachel, then at me. We're going to be late. Then you should go, I said gently. There's a daycare center 2 blocks from your office. They take walk-in. Rachel made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Those cost a fortune. Yes, I agreed. Childcare is expensive. Imagine how much money you've saved over the past 4 years. They stood there for another long moment, and I could see Marcus's mind working, trying to find the words that would make me change my mind, that would make me be the mother he needed right now, instead of the mother I should have been all along. But he couldn't find them, because they didn't exist. Finally, Rachel spun the stroller around, the wheels scraping against my concrete walkway with a harsh grinding sound. Come on, Emma, she snapped, her voice sharp with frustration that wasn't really about being late, wasn't really about the inconvenience, but about losing control of a resource she'd taken for granted. Marcus lingered a moment longer. Mom, he said, and for the first time that morning, there was something real in his voice. Not anger, not defensiveness, but something that might have been the beginning of understanding. We'll talk about this later. Yes, I agreed. When you're ready to actually talk. Not when you need something. He nodded, a tiny movement, barely perceptible, and then he was following Rachel down the walkway, his shoulders hunched in a way that made him look smaller than he was. I watched them pile into their car, Rachel's movements jerky with anger, Marcus moving on autopilot, Emma still crying as they buckled her into her car seat. The twins, mercifully, had fallen back asleep. Their car pulled away from the curb, and I stood there watching until it disappeared around the corner. And then I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. Not from fear or regret, but from the sheer adrenaline of finally saying the thing I'd been swallowing for years. I walked to the kitchen, my legs unsteady, and I made myself a cup of tea. Not coffee. I'd already had coffee. This was tea, because tea was slow. Tea was for sitting down. Tea was for moments when you needed to breathe and think and let the weight of what you'd just done settle into your bones. I carried the cup to the table and sat down, and only then did I let myself feel the full magnitude of what had just happened. I'd said no, after 4 years of yes, of course, whatever you need. I'd said no, and the sky hadn't fallen. The earth hadn't stopped turning. My son hadn't disowned me, though God knows Rachel might try to convince him to. But I was still here, still breathing, still whole. More than whole, actually. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. Not somebody's mother, not somebody's emergency contact, not somebody's solution to every childcare crisis, just myself. Betty, a woman with her own time, her own needs, her own right to establish boundaries. I took a sip of tea and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet was still there, the one I'd been beeling for months without really admitting to myself what I was doing. Every date, every hour, every instance of canceled plans or rearranged appointments. 4 years of data, organized and color-coded, undeniable proof that I hadn't been overreacting, hadn't been selfish, hadn't been unreasonable. I'd been used, systematically, consistently, lovingly used by people who genuinely believed they were entitled to my time because I'd never shown them otherwise. But that was done now. The pattern was broken, and whatever happened next, whether they came back angry or apologetic or not at all, I knew I'd done the right thing. The tea was still hot when my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom, we need to talk. Really talk. Can I call you tonight?" I stared at the message for a long moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to smooth things over, to make it easier for him. But I'd been making things easier for him his whole life. Maybe it was time he learned to sit with discomfort. I set the phone down without responding and finished my tea in silence. The phone call came at 8 p.m., exactly when Marcus said it would. I'd spent the day in a strange state of heightened awareness, every sound making me jump slightly, every car passing outside making me wonder if they were coming back. But they hadn't. Not in person, anyway. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Not to be petty, but because I needed those extra seconds to steady myself, to remember that I was allowed to hold my ground even when it felt uncomfortable. "Mom." His voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. This was the weariness of someone who'd spent all day thinking about something they didn't want to think about and had finally run out of ways to avoid it. "Hello, Marcus." "Rachel's putting the kids to bed. I'm in the garage." There was a muffled sound, probably him sitting down on the workbench he never used for actual work. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning." I didn't respond. I'd learned this trick from my own mother years ago. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply wait. Let the silence do the work. Let the other person fill it with truth instead of deflection. "You're right," he said finally, and those 2 words carried more weight than I'd expected. About most of it, anyway. We haven't been fair to you." "Most of it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Which part wasn't I right about?" He exhaled, a long breath that crackled through the phone speaker. "The charging thing. Mom, come on. You can't actually expect us to pay you like you're some kind of babysitter service." "Why not?" "Because you're our mother. Because that's not how family works." "Then explain to me how family does work," I said, settling deeper into my chair. I'd been preparing for this conversation all day, mentally rehearsing, but now that it was here, I found I didn't need the script. The words came naturally, born from years of swallowed frustration finally given permission to surface. Because from where I'm sitting, family has been working like this. You call when you need something. I provide it. You say thank you if you remember. You leave And then we repeat the cycle every few days until I'm so exhausted I can barely function. But I can't say anything because God forbid I'm not available. God forbid I put my own needs first. God forbid I act like I have a life outside of being your emergency childcare solution. It's not like that, Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then what is it like? Please, help me understand. Because I have been trying to figure out where I went wrong. At what point did I teach you that my time didn't matter? Was it when you were little and I dropped everything to coach your soccer team even though I was working 2 jobs? Was it when you were in college and I drove 4 hours every other weekend to bring you home-cooked meals and clean laundry? Or was it more recent? Maybe when you first had the twins and I moved my entire schedule around for 3 months to help you adjust to parenthood. Mom, I'm not finished. My voice was sharp now, harder than I'd meant it to be, but I couldn't stop. 4 years of pressure was finding its release, and trying to hold it back now would be like trying to stop a dam from breaking with my bare hands. I need you to understand something, Marcus. I love those children. I would do anything for them. But anything doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean sacrificing my health, my plans, my own life to be perpetually available for yours. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking if I was available and started assuming I was. You stopped treating it like a favor and started treating it like an obligation, like I owed you my time simply because I'm your mother. The silence on the other end was different now, heavier. I could almost hear him thinking, could imagine him sitting there in the garage surrounded by tools he'd bought but never learned to use, probably staring at the oil stain on the concrete floor that had been there since they moved in. I didn't realize, he said finally. I swear, Mom, I didn't realize it had gotten that bad. That's the problem, Marcus. You didn't realize because you didn't ask. When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Not are you available to watch the kids, not can you do me a favor, but actually asked how I was, about my life, my health, whether I had plans or friends or anything outside of being available for your family. Another long pause. Then quietly, I don't remember. Neither do I admitted, and the sadness in my own voice surprised me. And that's why I can't keep doing this. Not because I don't love you. Not because I don't adore those children. But because somewhere in the process of being everything for everyone else, I disappeared, and I need to find myself again before it's too late. The money thing still seems extreme, Marcus said, but there was less fight in his voice now. He was testing the boundary, seeing if I'd fold. I didn't. Let me put it in terms you'll understand, I said. You're a project manager. What would happen if one of your clients consistently called you at the last minute, demanded immediate turnarounds, never respected your time or boundaries, and expected you to work for free because they considered you a friend? I'd stop taking their calls, he answered immediately. Exactly. And if they showed up at your office unannounced, demanding your time, what would you do? I'd refer them to someone else, or tell them to schedule properly through the system. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Do you? Because I need to know you actually understand this, Marcus. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm not trying to be difficult or make your life harder. I'm trying to establish boundaries that should have been there all along. And if that feels like punishment, it's only because you've gotten so used to having unlimited access to me that reasonable limits feel like deprivation. That's not. He stopped himself. Maybe you're right. I am right. And here's what's going to happen now. You and Rachel are going to find actual childcare. Reliable, scheduled, paid childcare. Maybe it's a daycare. Maybe it's a nanny. Maybe it's a combination of things. But it's not going to be me as your default option. And once you have that established, once you have a real plan that doesn't revolve around my availability, then we can talk about me spending time with the kids. Real time, quality time, grandma time, not emergency babysitter time. How long is this going to last? Marcus asked, and I could hear the child in his voice now, the one who wanted to know when the punishment would be over, when things would go back to normal. This isn't temporary, Marcus. This is how it's going to be from now on. These are my boundaries. You can either respect them, or we can have a very distant relationship. Your choice. I heard a door open in the background, heard Rachel's voice asking if he was still on the phone. He muffled the speaker, but I could still hear her. Is she being reasonable yet? Something hardened in my chest. I heard that. Mom, she didn't mean. Yes, she did. And here's what you're going to tell Rachel. I am being completely reasonable. I am asking for basic respect, basic consideration, and basic compensation for professional level services. If that seems unreasonable to her, it's because she's never had to function in a world where I wasn't willing to sacrifice everything for her convenience. But that world doesn't exist anymore. She's just frustrated. So am I, Marcus. The difference is, my frustration is justified. Hers is just entitlement being denied. Another long silence. Then, what do we do now? You figure out your childcare situation like every other parent in the world. You call me if you want to have a relationship, not just when you need something. You start treating me like a person with my own life instead of a resource to be managed. And maybe, if you can do those things consistently for a while, we can rebuild something that actually looks like a healthy family dynamic. And if we can't, the question hung there, heavy with implications I didn't want to examine too closely. But I'd started this, and I owed it to both of us to finish it honestly. Then we'll know where we stand, I said quietly, and we'll both have to learn to live with that. Marcus didn't say anything for a long moment. I could hear his breathing, slightly uneven, like he was trying to decide whether to fight or surrender. Finally, I need to go. Rachel's waiting. Of course she is. Goodbye, Marcus. I ended the call before he could respond, before I could hear whatever half apology or justification he might offer. I'd said what needed to be said. The rest was up to him. I sat in my chair for a long time after that, watching the light fade from the windows, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one. My phone stayed silent. No follow-up text, no angry voicemail from Rachel, no desperate plea for reconciliation, just silence. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like space, room to breathe, permission to exist as something other than someone's solution. I made myself dinner, actual dinner, not just cereal or toast grabbed between childcare sessions. I took my time with it, chopped vegetables slowly, let the pasta cook while I sipped wine and listened to music I actually liked instead of children's songs that had been stuck in my head for years. I ate at the table with a real plate and cloth napkin, not standing at the counter shoveling food into my mouth before the next crisis hit. It felt revolutionary. This simple act of caring for myself, this radical decision to be present in my own life. After dinner, I opened my laptop again and did something I'd been too afraid to do before. I searched for activities in my area, book clubs, art classes, walking groups, things I'd always wanted to try but never had time for because I was too busy being available for everyone else. I bookmarked half a dozen options, felt a flutter of excitement in my chest that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or wants or emergencies. This was for me. Just me. My phone buzzed around 9:30. A text from my neighbor, Patricia. Saw the commotion this morning. Everything okay? I smiled and typed back. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I finally grew a spine. Her response came immediately. About damn time. Coffee tomorrow. Yes, I'd like that. And I would. Because tomorrow I had no children to watch, no last-minute emergencies to manage, no one else's schedule to revolve around. Tomorrow was mine. And so was the day after that, and the day after that. I'd spent 4 years teaching my son and his wife that I didn't matter. Now I was going to spend however long it took teaching myself that I did. 3 days passed without contact. 3 days of unusual quiet, of mornings that belonged to me, of afternoons spent doing absolutely nothing productive and feeling no guilt about it. I went to coffee with Patricia. I joined a book club that met Thursday evenings. I bought myself fresh flowers for my kitchen table, something I'd always considered frivolous, but that now felt like a small act of defiance against years of self-neglect. On Thursday afternoon, I did something I'd been putting off. I pulled out the banker's box from my closet, the one labeled financial records, and I started going through years of receipts, bank statements, and credit card bills. Not because I was planning to actually charge Marcus and Rachel, though the thought had a certain appeal, but because I needed to see it. I needed quantifiable proof that I hadn't been exaggerating, hadn't been overreacting, hadn't been the unreasonable one. The numbers were staggering. I'd started keeping casual track about 6 months ago, just mental notes really, after Rachel had made an offhand comment about how lucky they were to have free childcare when all her friends were paying hundreds per week. Something about the word lucky had stuck in my mind, had made me start paying attention to exactly how much of my life was being devoted to their convenience. But going back through the actual financial records, I found patterns I'd forgotten about. The grocery receipts from when they'd stayed for dinner, and I'd fed a family of 5 instead of just myself. The gas receipts from countless trips to their house, 40 minutes each way. The credit card charges for emergency diapers, formula, clothes, toys, things they'd asked me to pick up on my way, and then never paid me back for. I started a spreadsheet. Not because I was planning to send an actual invoice, though God, wouldn't that be something, but because I needed to see it laid out in black and white, needed the validation of data, of numbers that couldn't be argued with or explained away. 4 years of receipts translated into a story I'd been too close to see clearly. I'd spent, on average, 32 hours per month, providing childcare. At the going rate for a professional nanny in our area, I looked it up, that was roughly $18,000 per year, times 4 years, plus the groceries, the gas, the emergency purchases, the canceled appointments that had cost me cancellation fees. I sat back in my chair and stared at the final number, $87,340. That's what my help had cost me over 4 years. That's what I'd given, freely, lovingly, stupidly, to people who called me lucky that they even visited. The number felt obscene, not because I wanted the money back. I didn't, not really, but because it represented something so much more valuable than cash. It represented time I'd never get back, experiences I'd never have, a life I'd put on hold because I'd convinced myself that being needed was the same as being valued. I was still staring at the spreadsheet when my doorbell rang. My first instinct was not to answer. It was almost 5 p.m. on a Thursday. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing I wanted was to deal with solicitors or neighbors or anyone else who might want something from me. But curiosity won out. I saved the spreadsheet, closed my laptop, and went to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus, alone. No Rachel, no kids, no diaper bags or car seats or sippy cups. Just my son, standing on my porch, with his hands in his pockets, and his shoulders hunched in that way they got when he was uncomfortable. I opened the door but didn't unlock the screen. Marcus. Hey, Mom. Can I come in? I considered saying no, considered making him stand there and say whatever he'd come to say through the mesh screen, like I was some kind of gatekeeper to my own space. But that felt petty in a way that wouldn't serve either of us. I unlocked the screen and stepped aside. He came in slowly, like he was entering unfamiliar territory, even though he'd grown up in this house, had lived here for 18 years before college. He looked around the living room like he was seeing it for the first time, the clean surfaces, the book I'd left open on the coffee table, the fresh flowers in the vase. Place looks nice, he said. Thank you. You seem good, different. I'm rested, I said simply. Turns out when you're not providing free childcare multiple times a week, you have energy for other things. He flinched slightly, but didn't argue. Can we sit? I gestured to the couch. He sat on one end. I took the armchair across from him. The formal distance felt appropriate somehow. I've been thinking about what you said, Marcus began, his hands clasped between his knees. About all of it. The boundaries, the respect, the everything. I waited, and I talked to Rachel, really talked to her, for like 3 hours. We looked at our calendar, looked at how often we'd been dropping the kids off. Mom, I didn't realize it was that much. I swear in my head it was occasional, a few times a month. But Rachel had it in her planner. He trailed off, shaking his head. It was 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes more. I know. You kept track? I did. That must have felt, he struggled for the word, clinical, like you were documenting evidence against us. I was documenting reality, I corrected, because every time I tried to bring up how much I was doing, you'd both make it sound like I was exaggerating, like it wasn't really that much. I was just being sensitive. So I started keeping track, dates, times, duration, facts that couldn't be argued with. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Can I see them? I hadn't expected that. Why? Because I need to understand. I need to see what you saw. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or defensiveness, but all I saw was exhaustion and some that might have been genuine regret. I stood up and retrieved my laptop. This is just the last 6 months, I said, opening the spreadsheet. Before that, I was only keeping mental notes. I turned the screen toward him and watched his expression change as he scrolled through the entries. Date after date, hour after hour, a quantified record of my life being consumed by his family's needs. I'd color-coded it, green for planned babysitting, rare, yellow for last-minute requests, frequent, red for times I'd canceled my own plans or appointments to accommodate them, far too common. Jesus, Mom, he whispered. This is a lot. That's what I've been trying to tell you. He scrolled further, stopped at one entry. What's this note here? Canceled cardiologist appointment, 3rd time. Exactly what it says. I was having heart palpitations, needed to see my doctor, but you called that morning saying Rachel was sick and you had an important meeting. So I rescheduled. Again. Did you ever get to that appointment? Eventually, 4 months later. Turns out I have a minor arrhythmia that needs monitoring. Could have been caught earlier if I'd gone when I was supposed to. His face had gone pale. Mom, I didn't know, because you didn't ask. You assumed I'd be fine, that I didn't have anything important going on, that my health was less urgent than your meeting. It wasn't less urgent. I was just... He stopped, seemed to realize there was no good way to finish that sentence. I was selfish. We were selfish. I didn't disagree. He kept scrolling, stopped at another entry. You calculated how much it would have cost us to pay for this childcare. I did. $87,000. He said it like he was testing the words, seeing if they sounded real when spoken aloud. That's not including the current year. No, that's through last December. This year would add another 20,000 or so, if we're being conservative. Marcus set the laptop down carefully, like it might break. We can't pay you this. I'm not asking you to. Then why show me? Because you needed to see it. You needed to understand that this wasn't just me being difficult or oversensitive. This was a pattern of behavior that had a real cost. Not just financially, but in terms of my time, my health, my life. And you never even noticed, because you were so used to having unlimited access to me, that you stopped thinking about what it was costing. What do we do now? He asked. And there was something helpless in his voice that reminded me so much of the little boy he'd been, the one who would ask me to fix things he'd broken, to make better things he'd ruined, but I wasn't in the business of fixing things for him anymore. You figure out your childcare situation, I said firmly. I can give you some recommendations if you'd like. There's an excellent daycare on Willow Street, and Patricia's daughter runs an in-home care service that comes highly recommended. But that's your responsibility now, not mine. And us? Our relationship? That depends on you, on whether you can respect these boundaries, on whether you can see me as a person, with my own life, instead of a resource to be utilized. I want to, Marcus said. I really do. But Mom, I don't know if Rachel is going to be okay with this. And there it was, the real issue. Not whether Marcus understood or agreed, but whether Rachel would allow him to maintain these boundaries. Then you have a decision to make, I said quietly, because if you choose appeasing Rachel over respecting me, We're done. Not angry, not dramatic, just done. I'll be a polite stranger at family events. I'll send birthday cards, but I won't be in your daily life, won't be someone you can count on, won't be grandma in any meaningful way, because I can't keep doing this, Marcus. I won't survive it. His eyes widened. Mom, don't say that. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being literal. This past year, I've had 2 minor health scares that became major issues because I kept putting off my own care. I've lost friendships because I was never available. I've gained 20 pounds because I was stress eating and had no time for exercise. I've been living in a constant state of exhaustion and resentment, and if I keep going like this, it will kill me. Maybe not immediately, maybe not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, it will wear me down until there's nothing left. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Marcus sat with his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Mom. I never meant for it to be like this. I know, I said, and found that I meant it. I don't think you were trying to hurt me. I think you just stopped seeing me as a person separate from my usefulness to you, and I let that happen. I taught you that was acceptable. So this isn't just your fault, Marcus. It's mine, too. But it ends now. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so achingly familiar from his childhood that my heart squeezed. How do we fix this? You start by going home and having a real conversation with Rachel. Not about me being unreasonable, not about how to get around these boundaries, but about building an actual childcare plan that doesn't depend on me. And then you give me space. Real space. Not a few days until you have another emergency, but actual time to rebuild my own life. How much time? I don't know. A month, maybe. Maybe more. However long it takes for you to establish a routine that doesn't include me as a safety net. Marcus nodded slowly. And then we'll see. Maybe we can have Sunday dinners. Maybe I can take the kids one afternoon a week. One afternoon, scheduled in advance with me being allowed to say no if I have other plans. Maybe we can rebuild something healthy. But Marcus, that only works if you actually want a relationship with me, not just access to free childcare. I do want that. I swear I do. Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Show me that you value me enough to respect my boundaries even when it's inconvenient for you. He stood up, looked like he wanted to hug me but wasn't sure if it was allowed. I made the decision for him, stayed in my chair, not to be cruel, but because I needed him to understand that physical affection wasn't a reset button, wasn't a way to smooth over hard conversations and pretend everything was fine. I should go, he said finally. Yes, you should. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. I love you, Mom. I love you too. But love isn't enough. Not anymore. I need respect. I need consideration. I need to be treated like I matter. You do matter. Then act like it. He left without another word, and I listened to his car start, listened to him drive away, and then I sat in the quiet of my house and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The anger, the hurt, the relief, the fear, the hope, all of it, washing over me in waves until I was exhausted, but somehow lighter. I picked up my phone and texted Patricia, "Wine tomorrow instead of coffee." Her response came immediately. "Hell yes. My place or yours?" "Yours. I need to get out of this house." 7 p.m. "I'll have the good stuff ready." I smiled and set the phone down. Tomorrow I'd drink wine with a friend who valued my company for who I was, not what I could do for her. Tomorrow I'd laugh and complain, and maybe cry a little, and it would all be okay. But tonight, I'd sit in my quiet house and breathe in the space I'd created, the empty, beautiful, necessary space. 2 weeks passed, 14 days of silence from Marcus and Rachel, 14 days of me slowly remembering what it felt like to wake up without dreading the phone call, the text, the knock on the door. I joined Patricia's walking group. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before Marcus was born. I slept through entire nights without waking up anxious about what might be asked of me tomorrow. And then on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., my phone rang. I was in the middle of my coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with the morning light streaming through the window, reading a book that had nothing to do with parenting or sacrifice, or anything remotely related to children. I looked at the screen. Rach, my finger hovered over the decline button. Every instinct I'd been rebuilding over the past 2 weeks screamed at me to let it go to voicemail, to maintain the boundary, to not engage. But something made me answer. Not guilt, not obligation, but curiosity. What could possibly be so important that Rachel would break 2 weeks of silence at 6:47 in the morning? Hello? Betty. Her voice was wrong. Not angry, not entitled, but shaky. Scared. Betty, I need your help. I felt my stomach drop. This was how it always started. This was the hook, the thing that would pull me back in, make me fold, make me forget every boundary I'd worked so hard to establish. But I'd learned something over the past 2 weeks. I'd learned to pause, to think, to not react immediately. What's wrong? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. It's Marcus. He's in the hospital. He collapsed at work. They think it might be his heart. I'm here with him now, and the kids are at home with my sister, but she has to leave for work in an hour, and I don't have anyone else, and I can't leave Marcus. Slow down, I interrupted. Is Marcus okay? I don't know. They're running tests. But Betty, I need you to take the kids, just for today. Maybe tomorrow. I don't know. Her voice broke. Please. And there it was. Please. The word I'd been waiting to hear for 4 years. Not an assumption, not a demand, but an actual request. An acknowledgement that this was a favor, not an obligation. But even as I felt that small satisfaction, I felt something else. Genuine concern for my son. Whatever had happened between us, whatever boundaries I'd needed to establish, he was still my child. And if he was in the hospital with a potential heart problem. What hospital? I asked. St. Margaret's, ICU, 3rd floor. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We'll figure out the kids after I see Marcus. But Bethany has to leave. Then call her and tell her I'll be at your house in 45 minutes. Give me the door code. Rachel rattled off the number, her voice thick with relief and tears. Thank you. God, Betty, thank you. I hung up and sat there for a moment, my coffee getting cold, my book forgotten. This was different. This was an actual emergency, not a manufactured crisis to manipulate me into compliance. This was my son, possibly seriously ill, and his wife genuinely had no one else to call. But even knowing that, even feeling the pull of maternal instinct and genuine concern, I was aware of the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The urge to drop everything, to rush in and fix it, to take on all the burden and ask nothing in return. I was aware of it, and I could choose differently. I called Patricia. Do you have a key to my house? I asked when she answered, her voice still groggy with sleep. Yeah, you gave me one for emergencies. Why? What's wrong? Marcus is in the hospital. Rachel needs help with the kids. I'm going to take them for a day or two, but I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to check on me. Call me tonight, tomorrow, the next day. Make sure I'm not falling back into old patterns. Make sure I'm taking care of myself while I'm taking care of them. Can you do that? There was a pause. Then Patricia's voice came back warm and firm. I can do that. And Betty, it's okay to help in an actual emergency. That's what boundaries are for, protecting you from being used, not preventing you from being human. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. Go. I'll call you at 6 tonight. I threw on clothes, grabbed my phone and wallet, and headed out. The drive to St. Margaret's felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where everything was familiar but slightly wrong. How many times had I driven this route to help with the kids? But this time felt different. This time I was choosing it, not being coerced into it. I found Rachel in the ICU waiting room, her hair in a messy ponytail, still wearing what looked like pajama pants under a long coat. She looked up when I walked in, and something in her face cracked open. "He's stable," she said before I could ask. "They think it was a panic attack, not a heart attack. But they're keeping him for observation because his blood pressure was dangerously high, and they want to rule out any underlying issues." A panic attack. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a strange mix of emotions. My son had collapsed from stress, from anxiety, from something that had built up inside him until his body couldn't contain it anymore. And I knew, with the certainty of lived experience, exactly what that felt like. "Can I see him?" Rachel nodded. "Room 312. They're limiting visitors, but they'll let family in." I walked down the sterile hallway, following the signs to room 312. And there he was, my son, lying in a hospital bed with monitors beeping around him, an IV in his arm, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen him since he was a child. His eyes were closed, but they opened when I approached. "Mom," his voice was hoarse. "Hey, baby." The endearment slipped out before I could stop it, and I saw his eyes fill with tears. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. You were right. About everything." I pulled a chair up to his bed and sat down. "What happened?" "I was in a meeting. Someone asked me a question, and I started to answer, and then I couldn't breathe. My chest got tight. I started sweating, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, and someone was calling 911. He paused, swallowed hard. "The doctor said it was stress, that my blood pressure has probably been elevated for months, and I didn't know it, because I never slowed down long enough to pay attention to my body." The parallel wasn't lost on either of us. "How long have you been feeling like this?" I asked gently. "I don't know. A while, I guess. Work has been insane. The kids are exhausting. Rachel's been on me about money, about the house, about everything. And then when you set those boundaries, when you stopped being available, it forced me to confront how much we were depending on you, how much I was depending on you, and I didn't know how to handle it." "So you had a panic attack." "So I had a panic attack," he agreed. "The doctor said I need to make changes. Major changes, stress management, better work-life balance, therapy, maybe medication. Rachel's been telling me for months that I need to slow down, but I didn't listen. I never listen. I just keep pushing and pushing until something breaks." I reached out and took his hand. "You're not broken, Marcus. You're human. And humans have limits. Like you tried to tell me. Like I tried to tell you." He squeezed my hand. "Will you help with the kids just for a few days while I'm here, and while we figure out childcare? I know I have no right to ask. I know I haven't earned it, but I'm asking anyway." And here was the moment. The choice point. I could say no, hold firm to my boundaries, let them figure it out on their own even in the middle of a genuine crisis. Or I could say yes, help in this moment of real need, and trust that I'd established enough of a foundation to prevent sliding back into old patterns. "And I'll help," I said, "for 3 days. That gives Rachel time to find temporary childcare while you're here. And Marcus, when you get out, you're going to find a therapist, not just for stress management, but to work through why you felt so much pressure that your body literally shut down. Promise me." "I promise." "And you're going to talk to your boss about your workload. You're going to set boundaries there too, because this isn't sustainable, and the next time it might not be a panic attack. It might be something worse." "I know. You're right. I'll do it." I stayed with him for another hour, just sitting quietly while he dozed on and off. When Rachel came in to spell me, I hugged her briefly, a real hug, not the stiff obligatory kind, and told her I was heading to their house to relieve her sister. "Betty," Rachel said as I was leaving, "I'm sorry for how I've treated you, for how we took advantage of you. You were right to set boundaries. I just didn't want to admit it because it meant I had to face how entitled I'd become. Thank you for saying that. Can we fix this?" "I think so, if you're willing to do the work." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I am. I really am." I drove to their house, let myself in with the code Rachel had given me, and found Bethany, Rachel's sister, looking frazzled but managing. The twins were watching cartoons. Emma was eating cereal at the kitchen table. "Thank God," Bethany said when she saw me. "I was going to have to call in sick to work, and I really can't afford that right now." "Go," I told her. "I've got this." She practically ran out the door, and then it was just me and the kids. Emma looked up from her cereal, milk dribbling down her chin, and said, "Grandma Betty, are you babysitting?" And I smiled, because yes, I was babysitting. But this time, it was different. This time it was a choice, not an expectation. This time it had an end date. This time I was helping because I wanted to, not because I'd been manipulated into it. "Yes, sweetie, for a few days." "Is Daddy okay?" "Daddy's going to be fine. He just needs to rest for a bit." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went back to her cereal. The twins were absorbed in their cartoons. The house was messy, but not disastrous. And I had 3 days to help, and then 3 days to get back to my own life. I could do this, because this time I was choosing it. And that made all the difference. The 3 days I'd promised turned into 4, then almost 5. Not because Marcus and Rachel pushed, but because there were complications. His blood pressure wasn't stabilizing as quickly as they'd hoped, and they wanted to keep him for additional monitoring. Each day Rachel called and asked, never demanded, if I could stay one more day. And each day I checked in with myself, assessed my energy levels, confirmed with Patricia that I was still maintaining boundaries, and made a conscious choice to say yes. But on day 4, I also made some calls of my own. The first was to the daycare on Willow Street, the one I'd mentioned to Marcus. They had a waiting list, but the director recognized my name. We'd served on a library board together years ago, and she agreed to bump the twins and Emma up if Marcus and Rachel could come in for an intake meeting as soon as he was discharged. The second call was to Patricia's daughter, who ran the in-home childcare service. She had 2 openings for after-school care and could start the following week. The third call was to my own doctor, scheduling a physical I'd been putting off. If Marcus's health crisis had taught me anything, it was that ignoring your body's warning signs was a luxury none of us could afford. On the evening of day 4, after the kids were in bed and the house was finally quiet, Rachel came home from the hospital looking exhausted but less frantic than she had been. She found me in the kitchen, washing the dinner dishes by hand because their dishwasher was broken and apparently had been for weeks. "You don't have to do that," Rachel said softly. "I know, but I'm here, and it needs doing, so I'm doing it." She leaned against the counter, watching me work. "Marcus is being discharged tomorrow afternoon. They're giving him a strict care plan, medication, diet changes, mandatory time off work, therapy starting next week." "That's good."
Yeah.
She was quiet for a moment. "Betty, I need to tell you something." I rinsed the last plate and turned to face her, drying my hands on a dish towel. "I've been thinking a lot this week," Rachel continued, "about what you said, about how we treated you. And I realized something. I've been treating you the way my mother treated me, like I was just a resource to be used until I wore out. And when you set boundaries, I got angry because that's what I learned. That setting boundaries makes you selfish. That saying no makes you a bad person." This wasn't what I'd expected. I'd been prepared for defensiveness, maybe more apologies, but not this level of self-awareness. "My mother had me watching my younger siblings by the time I was 8, Rachel went on. By high school, I was basically their parent. And when I told her I wanted to go to college out of state, she said I was abandoning the family, that if I left I was selfish and ungrateful. So I stayed, went to community college, took care of everyone. And I resented every second of it." "Did you ever tell her that?" "No, because you don't say no to family. You don't set boundaries. You just endure." And then I had kids of my own, and suddenly I had this person, you, who was willing to help, and I took advantage of it. Because that's what you do with people who help. You use them until they break, and then you act surprised when they do. I set down the dish towel and moved to sit at the kitchen table. Rachel followed, sitting across from me. But you're not broken, Rachel said. You're just not willing to break for us anymore. And that's what I'm supposed to be. What Marcus is supposed to be. Strong enough to say no. Strong enough to ask for help without demanding it. Strong enough to build a life that doesn't depend on someone else's endless sacrifice. Yes, I said simply. That's exactly it. I don't know how to do that. Neither did I. I had to learn. And it's still hard. Every day I have to remind myself that taking care of myself isn't selfish, that setting boundaries isn't cruel, that I'm allowed to have a life separate from being available to everyone else. Rachel nodded, her eyes shiny with tears. Will you teach me? The question caught me off guard. Teach you what? How to do this? How to set boundaries without feeling like I'm failing everyone? How to ask for help instead of manipulating people into giving it? How to be a mother and a wife and a person all at the same time? I reached across the table and took her hand. I can try. But Rachel, it's not just about learning techniques. It's about changing how you think about yourself. About believing you're worth more than what you can do for other people. I don't know if I believe that yet. Then that's where we start. We sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, two women who'd been on opposite sides of a battlefield, finding unexpected common ground. The house was quiet around us, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when everything is still settling, still finding its new shape. What happens now? Rachel asked finally. Now we set up a structure that actually works. Marcus gets discharged tomorrow. I go home tomorrow night. Not because I don't care, but because I need to get back to my own life. You use the childcare resources I've set up. We establish a schedule for me to see the kids. Maybe Sunday afternoons. Maybe one evening a week. But it's scheduled. It's consistent. And it's something I actively choose rather than have imposed on me. What if we have an actual emergency? Then you call me, and I'll help if I can. But Rachel, the key word there is actual. This week was an actual emergency. Marcus needing to work late is not. You wanting a date night is not. Running low on milk is not. Do you understand the difference? I think so. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. Probably. And when you do, I'll tell you. And you'll apologize. And we'll recalibrate. That's how boundaries work. They're not walls, they're fences. With gates that can open and close as needed. Rachel smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since I'd known her. I like that metaphor. Good. Remember it. The next day, I helped Rachel prepare the house for Marcus's return, made a grocery run with a specific list of heart-healthy foods, and set up the medications and care instructions in a way that would be easy to follow. When it was time to pick up Marcus from the hospital, I stayed with the kids rather than going along. They came home around 4 p.m., Marcus moving slowly but looking better than he had in the hospital. He hugged me carefully, like he was afraid I might break or disappear. Thank you, he said, for everything. For this week, for setting boundaries that probably saved my life, for not saying I told you so. I was thinking it pretty loudly, though. He laughed, a real laugh, and I realized I hadn't heard that sound in years. Fair enough. Your mom set up childcare for us, Rachel interjected. The twins start daycare Monday, and Emma has after-school care 3 days a week. Marcus's eyebrows rose. You did? I made some calls. You still have to do the intake paperwork and pay the deposits. But yes, I handled the hard part. Thank you. But why? I thought you were done helping us. I'm done being taken advantage of, I corrected. I'm not done being your mother. There's a difference. This week showed me that you're both willing to change, willing to do the work. So I'm willing to meet you halfway. But Marcus, if you slide back into old patterns, if you start treating me like an on-call service again, I'm out. Permanently. Understood. Understood. I gathered my things. I hadn't brought much, just a small bag with a change of clothes and toiletries, and headed for the door. Emma came running, wrapped her arms around my legs. Are you leaving, Grandma? I am, sweetheart. But I'll see you Sunday afternoon. We're going to go to the park and get ice cream. Promise? Promise. I extracted myself gently, hugged the twins who were less emotionally articulate but no less attached, and made my way the car. Rachel walked me out. Betty, she said as I was getting in. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for giving us another chance. You're welcome. Don't waste it. We won't. I drove home in the late afternoon light, feeling lighter than I had in years. My house was exactly as I'd left it, clean, quiet, mine. I made myself dinner, something simple, and ate it while watching the sunset through my kitchen window. My phone buzzed. Patricia, status report. I smiled and typed back. Home. Safe. Boundaries intact. They're actually trying. Good. Wine tomorrow to celebrate. Always. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The past 4 days had been hard, had tested my resolve, had made me question whether I'd made the right choice in helping. But seeing Marcus and Rachel actually trying, actually willing to change, that made it worth it. And more importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could help without losing myself. Could be there for them without disappearing into them. Could love them without sacrificing everything. That was the real victory. Not winning, not being right, but finding a way to exist in relationship that didn't require my annihilation. I finished my dinner, washed my single plate, and settled into my favorite chair with my book. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow I'd start preparing for my afternoon with the grandkids. My scheduled, boundaried, chosen afternoon. But tonight was mine. And that was exactly how it should be. 3 months passed. 3 months of Sundays in the park with Emma and the twins. 3 months of scheduled phone calls where Marcus and Rachel actually asked about my life before mentioning the kids. 3 months of me showing up for them in ways that felt sustainable, meaningful, and most importantly, reciprocal. They paid for the childcare. They saw the therapist, both individually and as a couple. Marcus's blood pressure came down. Rachel started setting boundaries with her own family, something that caused its own kind of chaos, but that I watched from a respectful distance, offering advice only when asked. And I continued to build my own life. The painting class turned into a regular Tuesday evening commitment. I joined a women's hiking group. I dated briefly. Nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that I was still a person capable of being seen as more than just someone's mother or grandmother. I scheduled medical appointments, and actually kept them. I read books. I took naps. I existed.